Hi, everybody. This is your professor again. So we just talked about discourse versus speech community. So let's go on to the next part of the lecture, where we're going to drill down into what a discourse community is, or how John Swales defined it to turn into a useful tool for us to think about how different communities use communication, and for us respond to and use rhetoric. So there are 6 points that he makes about discourse communities. One, a discourse community has a common goal. Two, a discourse community has a network of communication between members. Three, discourse communities inform and supply feedback to members. Four, a discourse community uses different genres for communication. Five, a discourse community has specific lexis. Six, discourse communities contain enough members to sustain their continuation. Okay, so this is how he defines it. This helps us. Discourse community is not a conversation you have with somebody at the park, even if you have the common goal of, I don't know, looking after your kids while they're on the playground, because it is not this more, entrenched and not quite formal, but more permanent structure of communication and goal reaching, right? So discourse community is a little more organized than that, right? It's around a common goal. So let's take a look at these 6 points that he makes. So, number one, the common goal, the entire community agrees on the basic reason for this group's existence, right? So this whole group is towards one goal. They can disagree, they can even, strongly disagree with each other how to reach that goal, but they do want to reach that goal, right? In fundamental ways, this group exists to further these goals. Without the goal, the group doesn't exist. This is part of the foundational part of what a discourse community is. If you think about, say, the NRA, the National Rifle Association, they exist to promote gun ownership and gun rights, but there's strong disagreement within the group about how to go about that, what the goal should be, right? But fundamentally, they exist to, promote guns, right? Without guns, there is no NRA. So another example from my own experience, I belong to a discourse community made up of me and my fellow faculty members at Chaffey, right? Me and the rest of the professors. We share a number of goals, including offering excellent services for students and upholding academic standards. But without Chaffey, without Chaffey College, and the fact that we're all teaching there, there is no community, right? We don't exist as a discourse community without that common goal of trying to teach students at Chaffey. Okay, so common goal is the first one, the most foundational one. Second, a discourse community has a network of communication between members. So there has to be some way of communicating. It's not just everybody who likes red Ferraris as part of a discourse community. You have to be part of an organized group that communicates in some way. Now, these mechanisms can vary, right? It can be telephone, letters, although who uses letters, right? Different codes, text, emails, hand signals, right? You might be part of an ASL discourse community. This can be any kind of communication could fall under this heading, right? But there has to be some kind of organized communication, right? If there's no actual communication, you're not discussing a discourse community. Okay, so as a Chaffey prof, right? I'm part of this discourse community with the rest of the professors at Chaffey, and we use mainly in-person emails or in-person meetings. Well, we used to, right, before, of course, coronavirus, and email, right? We don't usually text each other. We don't usually call each other on the telephone. Maybe 20 years ago they did, but nowadays everybody emails or in-person meetings, right? These are the two main forms of communication that we have to communicate between members of our discourse community. Discourse communities inform and supply feedback to members, right? So a subscriber is not necessarily a member, right? I get the Costco newsletter every, I guess, month or whatever. I usually just throw it out because I'm a member of the Costco. I shop at Costco. I have a Costco membership, so I get the newsletter. It doesn't mean I'm part of a discourse community with Costco. I just get their newsletter. If I was part of a message board online and messaging back and forth, then we could think about this as a discourse community, right? Membership requires some level of interaction with the community. And the community has to be able to interact back. They don't have to interact, like you could be a passive member of a discourse community, but there has to be that mechanism for the back and forth communication, right? There must be regular opportunities for this interaction. Again, if I just send out a newsletter to people, and there's no interaction, there's no way they can answer and we can have a discussion. That's not really discourse community. That's not really what we're talking about. There has to be this communication. So, again, as a professor, I'm expected to attend regular meetings so that we can use our network of communication, email and meetings, to pursue our common goals. In fact, we have an English meeting once a month, English department meeting once a month. I'm also on faculty senate. We meet once a week. And so we have these regular opportunities for interaction where we can communicate back and forth. Even if we're not using email, we have these regular opportunities for open communication so we can pursue our common goals and discuss those. Okay, so supply feedback and interaction. A discourse community uses different genres for communication, and genre just simply refers to the style of a text. Okay, so genre, we can think of like, you've heard that probably with like science fiction movies, Western movie, that kind of stuff, right? The Road, that movie it's a post-apocalyptic novel. It has certain stylistic features that allow us to group it with other such novels as like The Hunger Games, if you're probably more familiar with that, right? So they're a genre of movies. They're both movies or books in this case, but they're also movies. So you can look at it either way. So they're in the broader category of movie or book, but we could subcategorize them in different genres. Now, what this means for discourse communities is, I use emails, but I use a certain kind of genre of emails. As a professor communicating with other professors, I'm expected to be professional. I don't write, "Yo, dog, what's up?" or something in my email when I'm emailing the dean about, some departmental matter, or emailing one of my other colleagues in another department or whatnot. We have a professional tone. We use a genre of email which is professional, which is, avoids slang and uses certain acronyms for the, well, I'm going to get into that next, but it has this professional tone, right? Same with our meetings. They're pretty formal, right? You don't just waltz in with your, wearing shorts and a tee. Well, I guess you could, but, they're a little bit more formal. People follow rules, and it's not just like a hangout session where we're just yakking about what to do, right? We have a certain genre of meeting, a certain genre of email, right? So different discourse communities have these different ways of communicating and different expectations for that communication. Okay, 5, a discourse community has specific lexis. And lexis, spelled with an I, just means the level of language consisting of vocabulary as opposed to grammar or syntax. So that just means a specific set of vocabulary used by this community, right? The specific jargon, the jargon is specific and often unique to a community, but also required by the member of that community for intercommunication, right? So that sounds complicated, but you're probably part of discourse communities that have different lexis, right? Let's say you're on a sports team. You probably have, the different terms for different positions, right? I don't know anything about sports, so in soccer I know there's like a power forward or something, and there's a striker, and there's a goal person, right? There's all these different terms, right, that are part of that specific lexis that goes with that discourse community. So, for example, at Chafee, we have a lot of acronyms to discuss the different departments and services at Chafee, right? DPS, PSR, CCFA. Maybe you know what DPS is, but the rest, these two, I'm sure you don't know what they mean. And we have dozens of other ones that we use. It's shorthand, because if I had to say, the Chafee College Faculty Association every time I talked about the CCFA, that wouldn't be very effective. Also, this is kind of like a way of belonging. I know what this means. I can use this acronym quickly with my colleagues, and allows us to form a kind of bond, or a form of kind of like secret language almost, where we all know what this means, and so we know we're part of this community. That's a big part of the lexis for a discourse community. If you're on a sports team and you don't know these terms for the different positions, imagine how foolish you would look, right? No one would trust you. So a discourse community has specific lexis. And last but not least, discourse communities have enough members to sustain their continuation. So communities take in beginners, and there needs to be like a ratio between the beginners and the experts in the community, right? You have to have the experienced people and the new people who are interested in joining, and that continue, people cycling through this, or else the discourse community could fade away and die, right? If there are no longer enough experts to inform novices, beginners, or not enough novices to carry on, the community will cease to exist, right? And that ratio depends on the community. It is not set like, oh, you need 3 experts for every 2 novices or something like that. It depends, but you need this balance between people who have been there for a while, new people coming in. That's what allows communities to continue. You can think about that in a sports team, right? You have your captain, right, who's been there for a while, and you have new people brought in, and you have your people who've been there for a while, and they kind of train and get everybody used to that community, right? The rules of that community, the lexis, the expectations of communication, all that stuff, right? The more experienced people kind of help train the new people and keep them cycling through. So at Chafee, we're always hiring new faculty members, and the more experienced members help teach the new members the ways of this discourse community, right? So like I'm fairly new at Chafee. I'm in my 4th year full time here, but there are people who are newer than I am, and I've given them advice about how to get things done, who to talk to for certain things. And there are more experienced people who definitely give me advice about how to get things done and who to talk to make sure things happen at Chafee. Right? So those are the 6 rules, right? Common goal, network of communication, opportunities for interaction, different genres of communication, so expectations of your communication, specific lexis, and a mix of novice and expert members in that community to continue the community. Okay, so that's what John Swales talks about, and we're going to think about how we can use this to think about how different groups respond and use rhetoric. So we can also compare this to something called an imagined community. This is an idea coined and written about by Benedict Anderson. And so he talks about an imagined community as a socially constructed community imagined by the people who perceive themselves as part of that group, right? Which is a fancy way for just saying like it's a community that doesn't have the same like organization. You imagine you're part of it. Like here's my example here. America is an imagined community. It's a real community too, but in a sense, it's this imagined community. We all imagine there's these values we share as Americans. Well, I'm not American yet, but you know what I mean. As part of this country, right? We all believe in these values, et cetera, et cetera. But there's no communication between most members. There's 400 million people here, and no clear shared goals. Everybody has a different idea of what America is, and yet there's this community we all imagine that we're a part of, and some people are very passionate about that and have very passionate ideas. And there's these symbols like the flag and the eagle that speak to us on these emotional levels because we imagine we're part of this imagined community, right? As a Canadian, I can tell you, the American flag and eagle have a very different effect on me than they will on someone who is really invested in this imagined community of America, right? So that's another community, another way we can think about community in a different way. We're not going to get into this, but I just wanted to point that out in comparison to something like a discourse community or a speech community. And I just want to end by, pointing out, obviously, there are many different ways of thinking about community. Just because you're part of a discourse community doesn't mean that you're locked into that. Most people, myself included, are part of multiple discourse communities that change and alter, and I drop out of some and I join others throughout my life, right? So it's just another way of thinking about group identity and our relationship to rhetoric and information. Thank you very much.